You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hi, I'm Jenny Thompson from Her World Cricket Tour, and you're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast.
Now that's the talk. Now that's the talking about yourself bit done, Jenny. And let's get into this cricket discussion, because I chose some topics to talk about and discuss. That's the whole point of a cricket discussion. You talk about topics and you discuss. So the first one, we've already talked about it a lot. It's obviously women's cricket. And it's come leaps and bounds over the years, as you said, Jenny. And many young girls all over the world are taking part in cricket and playing cricket. You've seen that on your tour, and you've highlighted that to us today. And many people watching women's cricket internationally now, all around the world. The T20 World Cup final in Australia in 2020, Australia and India had 86,000 people watch that final. And that was a watershed moment in the women's game, knowing that people are committed to women's cricket and want it to do well. And we're seeing very talented and skilled players from all the world that are very good cricketers. They've got very good skills with bat and ball and in the field. And you mentioned it, the Women's Premier League, the Women's Big Bash, the Women's 100. These leagues are popping up around the world to give players from full member countries, but also associate nations, the opportunity to earn money, but also to travel the world and experience a different culture. And that's what cricket does. You tour the world and you experience new places. But obviously it faces many challenges, women's cricket, and it's got to go through those challenges. And you've seen that on your tour, Jenny, the barriers and the challenges that many countries face, the stigma towards women's sport in general, but also women's cricket, trying to grow and develop women's cricket in not only full member countries, which they do struggle, barring Australia, England, India, but also the associate countries as well struggle big time in terms of that. Also, players' lack of security. They often play the game and they go and they never come back, which is a major problem in the women's game around the world. So there's a lot of challenges and barriers, Jenny. So since you started playing and covering women's cricket, what have been the major big changes you've witnessed in women's cricket that you've noticed over the years? And what are the areas that as a cricket community we need to improve on when it comes to the women's game?
So I've already mentioned in terms of the media, the massive shift that's happened, which is so amazing. But if I just look at myself as an English player coming from the country which invented cricket, but even in the 90s wasn't administered in a professional way. It was administered by the Women's Cricket Association, who kept it going for hundreds of years, which is absolute testament to them. But in those days, it was, if you played cricket, you did it solely for the love, and it cost you a lot of money to do that. Charlotte Edwards is a great example of someone who bestrode the amateur to professional era. When she started out, she had to buy her own blazer and pay for her own tour, and I remember there was a great fanfare across the women's cricket community because she got a Peugeot, I think it was a Peugeot 106 hatchback, an orange one, and it had emblazoned down the side Charlotte Edwards, international cricketer, because these days everyone knows Charlotte Edwards, but in those days they didn't. Actually, I got into England juniors contention. I got into the squad because I got her out, and I didn't know who I'd got out, and she'd been playing for England for a couple of years at that point, but I didn't know who she was. And then one day, 10 years later, my friend messaged me, who is in media as well, and he said, "Oh, women's cricket's arrived. Charlotte Edwards is the answer in a Guardian crossword clue." And I was reminded of that recently when someone put online, you know, the Matildas. There were 2 questions on the Matildas in a local pub quiz, and everybody knew the answer, which is, you know, the next level, not just the awareness of the quiz setter, but the fact that the general public know the answers. So in those days, as an English player, there was no pathway to professionalism. It certainly wasn't a goal. Whereas these days, I understand that in schools now, rounders used to be the girls' sport only offered in summer, maybe with tennis. And for those who don't know, rounders is a very simplified softball game. But now it's been taken out of the curriculum, replaced with cricket, because you can't be a professional rounders player, whereas it's an option to be a professional cricketer. And you've got all the role models, you know, they are like important. You can be a professional. Also, I know of cricket coaches who've been recruited to private girls' schools in England as a recruitment tool for that school, because parents have told the school, we will not send our daughter to your school unless you have adequate cricket coaching. Which, saying these words is just ridiculous, because to me that was always a dream, you know, oh, I'd love to go to a school or a cricket academy or anything like that. That's what I used to dream about. I'm going to run my own cricket school one day for girls, you know, and that's actually happening now, which is, it's just incredible, the shift. And then, for example, my county, I was telling you before that Cheshire is powerhouse. We smashed Scotland one year, and now Scotland are professionals, and they're so good. I watched them play in Spain. They're insanely good, and I love that you can be a professional in Hong Kong now, or South Korea, or Japan. And what a landscape! It's just so different.
Yeah, even in Brazil.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's an incredible program there, and the leadership there is just out of this world. The leaders on the board are just brilliant. But you did ask what needs to change with women's cricket. Now, you know, of course, with the ICC mandating that countries have to develop women's cricket to be eligible for the funding, that's had a huge impact on the world game, as you can expect. And of course, we're realistic / cynical. It's just how the world is, that, you know, some people are just going to take that as a box ticking exercise. But in fact, again, it was Terry in Estonia who said to me, he's like, just have a little look out. You'll be able to see the boards who are genuine in doing this by their representation of women on the board, how many coaches there are who are women, how many umpires. And also, it's not just that, it's where the money goes, because the money is supposed to go to the women, but I've seen it in more than one country that it doesn't. And then how many opportunities the women's international team get to play overseas and also at home, because that's frequently much less of an opportunity for the women than it is the men. But also, to me, it's not just about the numbers, it's about the social structure of it, because, for example, there's that many coaching and umpiring courses you can do now, which is absolutely great. But the dropout rate for women umpires across the world would be very interesting to study quantitatively, because qualitatively, and empirically, I have met that many women who had qualified as an umpire and dropped out within 2 years because of the abuse and disrespect that they received predominantly in the men's game. And I've filled in as umpire in several countries along the way, and I've had that exact experience myself in both of the matches that I did. So it's so prevalent. And do I know the LBW law? Well, you would hope so. And do you know how to signal a wide? Well, also I would hope so. But there's that. It's just frustrating, and it just gets annoying that as a woman you already have to overcome so much perception or misperception just to get to a baseline of being included. So there's so much that still needs to be done. But it's funny because there's such a duality for me as I'm going along what I'm seeing. I'm equally and simultaneously so happy, so in awe, so inspired, so overwhelmed with women's situations and opportunities, and I'm simultaneously massively angry with what I see and frustrated, and you can see where things need to change. And before I went out on tour the first time, one of the talks that I was giving, a woman here in Adelaide who runs the Working Women's Centres, Sandra, she said to me, she's like, sport, it's the last bastion of the patriarchy. I caught up with her the other day, and we were talking about that phrase and how it very much is. And that's why, advocating for yourself and other women and allies and everything like that is just super important. But as she said, after my talk discussing what I'd found in the last 54 countries, she added, but it's also the new frontier. And it's so true. It's so exciting. Like we're just at the beginning, but already not just cricket, women's sport, it can't be ignored anymore because of the figures. It's all about money, but the women are proving that it's a financially viable thing to do, to invest in women's sport. And of course, there's been this latent demand for so many years, and women have a lot of purchasing power. So, it's literally just been a case of making it happen, and, the money will flow. So overall, I'm both optimistic and really angry all at once. But what can you do? You can just do what you can do as the next person can, and everybody just make your own change and invest in women's sport with your time and money, and it will all grow exponentially.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. It's still cricket. Nothing's changed. It's still cricket. The one thing that hasn't changed is the game. Still the same game. Bat and ball in the field. But we should include everyone from all backgrounds and all men and female to play cricket, because cricket's a game for everyone, and we shouldn't exclude people because of that. And women's cricket has a long way to go, but there's some great signs, especially here in Australia, with the women's team doing what they're doing, leading the way. And you see young girls wanting to be a Lise Perry, or it's wonderful to see that, role models, and it just makes you realize that it's a worth fighting cause to champion women's sport, but also, especially in these associate countries, and you've experienced that on your tour, Jenny, is that it empowers women as well to achieve something. They come from very poor backgrounds, some countries, poverty. A lot of them don't go to school, have an education. Like in Brazil, they have a program there where you can go to university and study, and many of the girls that play for Brazil are the first in their family to go to a university. So it's just remarkable what sport and cricket can do to change people's lives. And in women's cricket, it's certainly doing that for women around the world, which is fantastic. And we can't control the uncontrollables, but we can control what we can control. And that's still promoted and spruik women's cricket and say, yeah, it's a wonderful thing. The talented cricketers, they know what they're doing. The one thing that has changed is that women are playing cricket, but the game of cricket hasn't changed itself. It's still the same game, still the 22 yards, same game, same tactics, same everything. So we should be all proud as a cricket community that, you know, we do include people of all walks of life, men and women, and people who have other disabilities and inclusion, which is fantastic. And you've certainly seen that on your side of things with the tour, Jenny, which is fantastic to see. That's why we love this game, because of all those reasons I just mentioned. So wonderful to hear your thoughts on that, Jenny, about women's cricket. And let's talk about associate cricket, Jenny, because as I mentioned before, and as you mentioned, nearly all the countries that you visited on your tour are associate countries within cricket. Mm-hmm. They're one of the 96 members of the ICC. And on the podcast, Jenny, you would know, and others who are listening, that late last year we started an associate cricket series on the podcast. Mm-hmm. We've spoken to many good people from many of these great countries that play associate cricket or part of international cricket as an associate country. We've spoken to Bertus de Jong, the journalist in the Netherlands. We've spoken to Andrew Nixon. He's a writer about European cricket. Craig White from Mexico. Brazil, Matt Featherston and Roberta, Moretti Avery. Japan, Alan Kerr. And Captain Kendall Katawaki Fleming, who's the captain of the Japan men's team. And Peter Della Penna, which I'm sure you would know from ESPN Cricket, journalist on US cricket. That was great to chat to him. So we've spoken to those people thus far, and there's more episodes coming in the near future. And the reason I started it was to promote it, because associate cricket, to bring awareness to it, but also to understand the stories of the people behind the scenes, you know, and the players from those countries that really commit themselves to promoting cricket, because they put a lot of hours in and they're very passionate. And I've learned a lot from listening to them and hearing them speak passionately about what they're doing. And there's some really good, passionate people out there. And they want to promote cricket and grow it and change people's lives in those countries, which they are. Yeah, most of the countries that are a part of the associate members of the ICC, all of them, not all of them, but some of them come from very poor backgrounds, undeveloped countries, etc. So cricket does have a way of changing people's lives. And Jenny, you would agree that the two biggest challenges are, first of all, funding and growing and developing the game. Many associate countries find this problem out, and it's a very difficult problem to face. Given how international cricket is at the moment with the distribution model of the revenue and the funds, it could be better. And whenever I ask this question to people from this series that I've done, they've always said the same thing. We just need money and funding, and we need facilities, and we need support, because we can't do it all on our own. So we need the cricketing community to help us, and always get the same answer to that question. So many cricket boards have to ask themselves, how do we get cricket into the community? How do we promote it, spruik it? How do we get it into schools to encourage students to go to school when you play a sport like cricket or something? That's been the case in some countries where they use that as an incentive to go to school, and that, which is a good program to do. You know, making cricket accessible to everyone. You go down to your local park. We take that for granted here in Australia. You go down to your park and there's a net and a pitch. Whereas in other countries, there's no turf wickets. There's no artificial wickets. They play on football grounds. Like in South America, they do. Most of the grounds there are football grounds, because that's a popular sport in those countries. So all these questions that people have to ask themselves. So Jenny, what have you noticed about how these associate countries go about developing and growing cricket in their country from your tour thus far? And do you think, as a cricket community, we should do more to help these associate nations out?
Brilliant questions. And I would also like just to say that your summary there of all the challenges faced by associate cricket is bang on. So what was the first question? What have I what have I noticed?
What have you noticed from touring these countries? What have you noticed about these countries growing cricket and developing cricket in their own country and communities?
Okay, yeah. So number one, I've noticed that the more successful countries, this is a direct correlation and it shouldn't be any surprise, have the best leaders, the ones who are able to engage others, take on board all the ideas, implement them. They've got great relationships with local stakeholders, government, local government people, etc. So we can look at Brazil and Japan. You've spoken with Alan as well. They're quite analogous and they're often compared with each other, and for good reason. So that's important. Absolutely, the funding is a huge issue, but then it's not just the comparative lack of funding, it's then how the funding is used, which can be problematic or it can be very creative. Definitely getting into schools is certainly key. I've noticed that there's a lot of reinventing the wheel as I've gone along. I've spoken with lots of people and I've said, oh, but did you know they're doing this over here? No. Did you know that? No. And I know there's often ICC conferences bringing people together, but to me, it's a little bit like, where's the information sharing? And I'm happy to fill that void and give people contacts, put people into touch with each other, because I'm interested in the development of the game. But, sometimes I think it would be good to have a little bit more joined up thinking, maybe. But one thing that I have noticed, which you did definitely mention, is the ridiculous, boundless passion for cricket that particularly the people who run the boards have. So many people are volunteers, like the vast majority. And, for example, in Korea, Nasser Khan is heavily involved there. And he said to me, I'm trilingual, have all these business skills. My friends have told me for years I should be making money. But cricket's in my blood, it's in my heart, and he's just out there doing everything all the time. He'll mark the lines, he'll, umpire, he'll arrange things way above his remit. And this is just so replicated around the world. But at the same time, I think it actually incenses me. Trying to keep understated about this, the distribution model. It's so ridiculous. It's so wrong. And, I always like value for money, right? Who doesn't? And I look at how much $1 can buy in one country versus another, and the diminishing marginal returns. Like, to me, if India has an extra $1 million, well, it's not going to make a difference, right, to their cricket. Yeah. But that $1 million can change entirely an associate country's landscape. You've mentioned facilities and the lack of. It's very, very striking when I go around. Like, for example, in my first 20 countries, I needed spikes in one country. And then, I get back to Australia and people don't turn up to nets on a Wednesday night because, you know, they're just sitting on the sofa instead, or just whatever. I want to scream to them, but it's not my place. But I do. I want to say, guys, don't you understand? You're so lucky to have, well, practice facilities, but also grass ones. These have been curated so magnificently for you. Look, you know, or if I'm just driving around and I just like look at the local club, I'm like, there's 3 grass pitches. You know, it's really, the contrast is so striking. And I think that leads into your second question about, is the onus on, you know, the full member countries to do much more? Absolutely it is, in terms of advocating for more funding, which might be a bit of a pipe dream because of the power situations going on there, but nevertheless you may as well ask. But also in terms of education, one country in Europe, which I won't name, suggested to me that it would be nice if the ECB helped a little bit more the European countries. And I know Australia helps out with PNG and other countries in the Pacific, but I think there needs to be a lot more of that. And also, I was only talking today with my friend who helped me get up some donations when we went to Indonesia last year. She doesn't even play cricket, but she arranged a whole kit bag because that's the kind of person she is. But, you know, I was just like, I know there are a few organizations which collect donated kit from people, but again, the amount of wastage that we have with our own kit over here, you know, it needs to be redistributed overseas. And yet, for having said both of those things, I understand it's slightly a bit out of sight, out of mind, but also it's a little bit, well, maybe the countries with, you know, the associate countries, maybe, I don't know if they've approached, say, the ECB to help. You know, maybe if they said to the ECB, we could do with this, would you mind helping us? Could you send us some coaches? Could you do this? Could you do that? Then there might be a little bit more engagement. And that's not to say that the ECB do nothing, because I certainly know they do. And also they've got their own problems, but and situations that they're trying to develop. But I mean, in some ways, this is broadly aligned to, if you look at foreign aid in any country and all the pros and cons of that, it's quite analogous to me. But to me, it just makes sense to help the other countries grow the game, because to me, it's a situation of equity, and the more people who can participate in this game, the better it is for their lives. You know, cricket literally changes lives. Like, I had 10 years out of the game. I didn't realize that cricket had such a beneficial impact on my mental health until I came back and realized what I'd been missing in all that time. And that's what really elevated me into a very passionate advocate for participation. And you mentioned with people with disabilities as well, that's critical. Everybody should have access to cricket, whether they choose to continue with cricket or not, because it's more than a sport. It's life skills, it's social skills, it's mental well-being, it's self-esteem, it's everything that participating in a team game can give you. So I would love so much to see so much more assistance given to the associates, because again, their struggles are analogous to what I've seen in women's cricket throughout my life, even in the country that invented cricket, which actually is quite disgusting. But, you know, we can only look at where we are now, and it's all so much more positive, and it's going even more in the right direction. But really, it's not that hard to make a huge difference to these associate countries. And I've heard several associate countries like just say, well, we're not seen as important because, you know, oh, the participation in our country is low, it's a minor sport, it's this and that. But that to me is, it's not a backwards way of thinking, but it's a not helpful way of thinking, because if you're not growing the sport or putting your efforts in, or there's no funding to do that, then how are you meant to do it? And this is what a lot of the people who run the boards tell me. You know, we're told we have to create all this sponsorship, but we're actually too busy just trying to run cricket in the first place and jump through some hoops in a certain way. Just, you know, it would be like, cricket is the second biggest sport in the world in terms of participation. And I think, you know, it's easy to look at the BCCI and criticize them for taking the power and the money and all that. But at the same time, it's predominantly Indian expats who love the game so much, who have taken it around the world and helped it grow. So I don't know. It's just, and like it's the fastest growing sport for women in Asia. There's so many things that's good, but I love also like India helping Nepal out, that sort of thing. We need to see much more of it. But at this point, I don't know whether it would happen, because, you know, just listening to the leaders tearing their hair out, and often you get the situation where those people from whichever country, they can't speak out because they'll be marginalized or penalized, you know, whereas obviously someone like me, I can speak out because I don't have to answer to anyone, actually, which is quite liberating. But also just, I think, you know, it's how these political systems end up, and they defy logic half the time, situations, but that's just how they are. And then you say, well, let's take a step back, let's bring some logic into the situation. And to you and I, it's so clear. And to every single associate country, when you go round, you said we just need funding, we need facilities. And then, of course, you got the upkeep of the facilities. But, you know, cross that bridge when you get to it. But to me, there's no reason why the pie can't be divided a different way. But yeah, I understand that it won't be, and the reasons that it won't be. So it's always complex, and it's really frustrating, because from the outside it seems so obvious. But, you know, again, it's one of those things, you know, is it worth the investment because is the interest there? Well, the interest generally isn't there because the media doesn't cover it as much. Why doesn't the media cover it as much? Because the interest isn't there. And again, it's that vicious circle, which could just be so easily changed. But, you know, as with everything, it always seems very easy from the outside. The match always looks very easy when you're sitting in the crowd. So I'm not saying that there's not a lot of passionate people in the ICC or even in the main full member boards advocating for those kinds of things, but often you need the right decision makers or the critical mass to make the difference. But I tell you what, I'm very, very hopeful that change can be made, and anything that I can do in my small way to make a difference, then I certainly will. Because often I'll go to these countries and people will say, well, nobody cares about us because we're sort of tucked in the middle of the, you know, far away geographically from the centers of power, and nobody cares. And then I say, well, I care. I'm here. I can tell you a story. And yes, it may just be me at the moment, but, you know, this is also the same for women's cricket. By the time I finish, I'm going to have like a pretty huge testimony from around the world as to what's going on and how people are feeling about it. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see the reactions to that and see if any change comes from it. And even if it doesn't, then, you know, I've tried my bit to make that difference. But, you know, it can't just be me, and it can't just be you, and it can't just be these isolated boards. It takes a lot of people to come and stand together. And on that note, I know, like, Afghanistan are not an associate country, but seriously, what is going on with them still being funded? Like, that is just it's so wrong, and it needs the full members and all of the members just to really stand up and say that is not acceptable, because that is a huge inequity that, you know, is allied to the associate issue, but not exactly the same. But, you know, you and I could talk about inequitable situations in cricket and life for the rest of the year. But, you know, sorry, I just went off on a little bit of a rant there. But
no, that's
right, I get very passionate about inequity. Really, inequity. I think everybody deserves a chance, and in this case, a chance to participate in cricket. It happens to be, yeah,
absolutely. I share the same sentiments. It's good to rant and be frustrated. I think the ICC have lost sight of that. What's the purpose of a governing body? Is to promote and grow and develop the sport in all parts of the world. That's your job. Even the ICC have that as their motto and mission statement. And they're not even doing that. So is that hypercritical of them? It probably is. But doing this series myself has been liberating. I've learned something new, because let's be honest, I've been used to the mainstream cricket stuff for years, because I'm from Australia. You're from England, you'll share the same views. But when you learn about associate countries, you learn about the people who put in the 9 to 5 hours, backbreaking work, wanting to get something up. And the stories that I've heard from the people I've spoken to have just been amazing.
Yes.
You know, and the programs that they're doing, the passionate people, they always say afterwards when we finish speaking, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be on your podcast, to give us a platform and a voice, because we're not heard sometimes.
That's right.
And that feels yes, that feels quite emotional, but proud. I'm proud that I can, in my own sort of way, help out these countries and get the word out there. But I think the ICC have lost sight of that. I think we can't be selfish. We have to look after others. And in the cricketing community, as we've talked about in this chat, we got to give back. And I always have a saying, Jenny, is that the game doesn't owe us anything, but we owe the game. And we do. We owe the game immensely. You know, so volunteer at your local club. Be an umpire, you know, be a scorer. Volunteer at your club. If you've got unwanted cricket kit, and that was a great point that you raised there, donate it. Donate it to someone who's less fortunate than you, who wants to play cricket. Let them have a bat. Let them have pads and a helmet, because it's very expensive in this current climate. Or donate it to someone you know from an associate country. Yeah, have my kit back. I don't need it. I've got a new one. And that's absolutely right. We do take those things for granted here in Australia and in full member countries. And that's a brilliant point that you raised there, Jenny. And I never thought of it until you mentioned it. And I was like, yeah, you're spot on there. We do take things for granted. And these associate countries, think about it. You know, they don't have indoor facilities, you know, so they can't play when it's raining. Like we can when it's raining, we can play indoors. But they don't. And they don't have good pitches, you know. They don't have synthetic turf. They don't have turf. They don't have nets. You can't even go to a sports shop in those countries and buy a cricket ball or cricket equipment, because no one's heard of a stump or a bat or a helmet. But that's starting to change, and hopefully it will continue to change as we keep advocating for this. But it's, as you said, it's the powers to be. It's for them to change their mindset. And you say, you know what? Maybe we are neglecting associate cricket a bit here. Maybe we should do the good thing as a cricket citizen, is to help out. And some cricket boards are doing that. You have some passionate people on boards, but other people just think about themselves and the profits and the money, which really frustrates me. It's like talking to a brick wall, the ICC sometimes. Nothing responsive at all. Just, no, that's it. We'll just brush that aside at the next meeting. We won't vote against that. Associate members don't have full voting rights, as an example. So they don't have a say. They get outvoted on any issue or any topic that gets discussed at a meeting. So that's my little rant there, Jenny, that I've wanted to get out. Because, we can do better and we should do better. And at the moment, we're not quite doing that. And I think many people who are listening would share the same views and sentiments about that. And I often get that from people who are watching this Associate Cricket series on the podcast. They often say that and say, keep up the good work because we need to learn more about Associate Cricket. And you put in the time and money into it. A prime example, like the Netherlands, they defeated South Africa twice in 2 World Cups, T20 World Cup, 50-over World Cup last year in India. Look what Ireland did in 2007 in the Caribbean. They had some good victories over there. So if you put the money and the time in and invest, you can have great results. It's sort of the thing. I know it's a little bit off topic. It's not Associate Cricket, but the West Indies winning in Brisbane recently.
Amazing.
The Gabba. Shamar Joseph taking 7 wickets. If you support the countries like the West Indies and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and these other countries that are doing it tough, you put the time and effort in, that's what you can get. That's the result you're going to get. You're going to get good cricket like that. And it changed people's lives. It certainly changed his life. 7 wickets to win a test match. And you saw Carl Hooper and Brian Lara burst into tears because it meant so much. So that's what we can achieve in cricket. And I hope we can achieve that in the near future. But it's up to the powers of B to decide that. Well, Jenny, we've reached the final topic of our long cricket discussion. It's like a test match, batting for 6 hours. We're getting towards the end of play, stumps, and we're not far away before we finish off. But our last topic, Jenny, is about the future. What does the future hold for women's cricket? And it's very hard to predict the future, as you know. Very uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. But Jenny, how do you see the future of women's cricket and associate cricket more broadly in terms of women's cricket as well, going into the future? How do you see the future and the outlook of that?
Well, I've already touched upon this during our chat, but, I'm very hopeful about it. I'm very optimistic, and I can see change continuing to happen exponentially. And it's interesting, when there's so much chat about saturation of the men's game, but there's definitely still so much room for growth in the women's game. It will be very interesting to see the future. For example, a tournament like Fair Break, which took much longer than it should have done to get off the ground for political reasons, finally, gets sanctioned by the ICC and then ironically wins, an award for innovation. It's ironic given that the ICC had obviously taken so long to sanction it. But I don't know about the future of Fair Break and its longevity. For example, because it's almost not exactly making itself redundant, but it will be hard for the marquee players to have availability for that. But it's such a great platform for the associate players, which is then not always reflected in the auctions and availability in, say, the WPL or the English leagues, because there's loads of really good talent in the associate countries, but they suffer for being from associate countries. And then, Fair Break's given them a chance, and in some ways, and that's been enough to change people's lives within that. But I can't see fair break lasting that long, sadly. I'd love to be proven wrong, but you're always a hostage to fortune when you make a prediction. Just really looking forward to seeing what's going to go on with the WPL this year. I just feel like women's cricket, and I keep saying women's sport in general, just at the beginning. I feel like it's going to be really interesting to continue to watch how female athletes negotiate the astronomical sums that are now available for them. I would like a bigger appreciation of the recent women's history for cricket, of the people, these, to me, the phrase seems to be that these women are standing on the shoulders of invisible giants, but they have no interest in knowing who the women are, who's paved the way for them. And I would like to see that I would like to see that change. But again, we will have to see. There was another point I was going to make, which I cannot remember. But it was a good one. Future. Just give me a second. This happens a lot. I have too many competing ideas in my brain, and then I inevitably forget.
It's just a little bit too much, and you can't really
one or the other. Like I kept forgetting your questions because
right.
There was a lot going on in my brain.
Well, it's understandable when you are about to visit 80 countries approximately at the end of your tour. So
I know, and I've still got all the 54 countries hanging here until they get out on the page.
Yeah.
But yes, they oh yeah, that was what I was going to say. Okay, so cut back on. I also think what's really quite interesting is the research that's being done into female athletes at the moment. So suddenly there's so much interest in menstrual cycles. There's so much research being done, and the sexism regarding women's health is such a massive global ongoing issue. And myself and all my friends have got personal stories about prejudice we've encountered as female patients, and you just know that that's replicated on a wide scale. And traditional lack of research into women's health versus men's health is criminal, really. That's not too strong a word, but suddenly there's all this interest in menstrual cycles. Now I happened to mention this recently with my friend who's a sports journalist, and he made the obvious point, well, obvious in retrospect, that it's for the you can get an advantage as a playing group if you understand menstrual cycles a lot more, and you can optimize and manage and all those kinds of things. And I just think that is so fascinating. So it'll be interesting to look at women's cricket and in general women's sport in terms of that kind of thing in the future. And also I think at the moment I find it very interesting how women's cricketers in particular are pedestalized, and there doesn't seem to be any negative media around them in the way that you get in the men's game.
Yep.
But I'll be interesting. That's going to change in the future. I mean, it was a watershed moment when media started being critical of the players in the first place, like their play on the pitch, when they hadn't been used to that. And I know certainly myself, I was very mindful when I was one of the only cricket voices for women in the world, that most of the time my job was to educate and inform. I certainly wasn't at entertainment level, which I could do with the men. because you can assume a certain level of knowledge from your reader, but also these male players are professionals, so you're more legitimized in making some critical, like constructive but nevertheless critical comments on male cricketers that you couldn't with the women. So it's not just the women's game that we're going to look at how it's going to change in terms of play, which can only still get better and better. But the media around it, everything, how the players respond, it's a really fascinating time.
Yes, absolutely, and I agree with what you said there, and I think the future is bright, and there are going to be some challenges along the way, but the future is bright for women's cricket going forward, and
really is. It's never been a better time to be a female athlete, actually.
Yeah, absolutely, because women's cricket, as well as women's sport, has taken off around the world and getting momentum, which is fantastic, and lots changed since the early days, and we're starting to see that change in cricket, and long may that continue. Well, Jenny, we finally reached the end of play at Stumps. We've played for 6 hours in this first session of our chat, but I've enjoyed it immensely, and I've learned a lot. And thank you for joining me for this cricket discussion to discuss Her World Cricket Tour and your cricketing journey. It's been fascinating listening to your stories and views and the tour itself, and I'm sure people listening would learn a lot about you as well and what you're doing, because it's really remarkable stuff, and it's a great achievement. And the finishing line is almost in sight, and we can't wait to see you complete it and release the book, because it's going to have wonderful tales of cricket. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. Got to send me an advance copy, Jenny.
Sure.
Got to send me an advance copy to read. Absolutely. So, Jenny, if people want to get in touch with you in terms of following Her World Cricket Tour and following your adventures around the globe, playing cricket and doing all other stuff, where can they do that?
I'm very exclusively available only on Facebook and Instagram, Her World Cricket Tour. And like I say, that gives a day-to-day overview as to what's going on and the people that I'm meeting. But naturally, social media is very limited in terms of attention span and stuff that you can include there. So I frequently allude to the fact that there will be more in the book, or the full story, or the behind the scenes story in the book. And, I'm not trying to tease people. It's just literally a fact that I can't fit it all in there. But please join the journey, because it's a lot of fun, and you never know what you're going to get from something really sad or provocative or angry or very silly slapstick if I'm involved. So it's a lot of fun, and I guess it's very reflective of traveling. You don't know a lot of the time what you're going to stumble across, and that's part of the fun, because I certainly don't know what's happening, so or what's going to happen. So, come and join the journey and discover along with me what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. We will leave links to those in the description of this episode for people to check out Jenny's journey and support her on this great once-in-a-lifetime journey of discovery, but also celebrating the wonderful game of cricket as well. Before we go, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Once again, thank you, Jenny, for joining me today to discuss Her World Cricket Tour and your cricket journey with us. I hope all of you watching or listening to this cricket discussion learned a lot about Her World Cricket Tour from Jenny and her cricketing journey. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.